everybody who has worked on this case has gone home and cried.
The lead prosecutor in the Ruby Franke case tells all, speaking with Law and Crime for the first time since these chilling videos were made public.
This is hot. It's dry.
So I got my shades on.
You got pictures? I'll take more. If you want me to send them to you.
Washington County Attorney Eric Clark tells us the case is unlike anything he's ever seen before.
Child abuse to this degree is something that is super abnormal.
Clark first heard the name Ruby Franke in summer 2023 after she and Jodi Hildebrandt were arrested. But Clark quickly became familiar with both women and the gruesome ways they abused Franke's two youngest children.
I don't know that any of us have ever had a case where you have someone who, in that level of detail, is cataloging their criminal acts.
Before we saw either of these mugshots, we saw Ruby Franke on her YouTube channel, 8 Passengers. At one point, more than 2 million subscribers followed along with her vlog-style videos, recounting her life with husband Kevin and their 6 kids. Even then, Ruby faced some backlash for her unconventional parenting tactics.
I know that her teacher is uncomfortable with her being hungry and not having a lunch, and it would ease her discomfort if I came to the school with a lunch. But I responded and just said, Eve is responsible for making her lunches in the morning, and she actually told me she did pack a lunch. So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry. And hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
But the real backlash and criminal charges came in 2023 after Ruby's youngest son reached out to a neighbor for help.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station.
The then 12-year-old broke free from duct tape shackles around his wrists and ankles that investigators later described in great detail.
And then medical got there. They started cutting the stuff off him, and then you can see like the dark around his ankles, and it you could smell it, the flesh. It's underneath the tape. As soon as they took it off, you can, even outside, you could smell the flesh.
At the time, the boy and his younger sister were being held in Jodi's Ivins, Utah home. The emotional moments he asked for help are caught on Ring camera video, as are the moments he and his sister are finally seen by first responders.
222-1512. I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here at my front door asking for help. And he said he had just came from a neighbor's house, and he's emaciated, he's got tape around his legs, he's hungry, and he's thirsty.
Need someone immediately.
You come in, my buddy. I'm a police officer. Are you going for the union here? Hey. Hey, I'm Sergeant Tolber. I'm going to just get a few pictures. Are you okay with that?
Ruby and Jodi were arrested and eventually charged with 6 counts of aggravated child abuse. Clark says his office wasn't familiar with either women and was shocked with the response the case brought. Had you ever heard of her before that?
I hadn't, and nobody who has worked on this case from the law enforcement side was aware of it that I've talked to either. So we were all kind of oblivious that we would get this media storm on this case.
Nearly right away, Clark's team at the Washington County Attorney's Office was on the case.
So I was hearing about it probably the day after the arrests. Our special victim prosecutor team was working with officers the day of, so they're getting calls. Hey, we're working on warrants. We've got a crazy child abuse case, and so our office was involved that first day, and having those communications back and forth with Detective Bate. But I wasn't really aware of it until the next day, as we're talking about, what's going on? How are we going to handle this?
And almost right away, the case stood out.
We cover child abuse cases, right? Like, unfortunately, child abuse is something that happens in all the communities in our country. And it's something we should always be speaking out against and trying to stop, right? In our office's institutional memory, we can only think of one case that is comparable to this. And that's with, 15 prosecutors collective experience. Right? So immediately this case didn't feel normal on the, whoa, this is an awful case perspective. And for better or for worse, this case was also felt different to all the people doing the investigative work, because statistically crime occurs and is reported more often in low-income communities, right? It's not that often that you have, a $2 or $3 million home in a like super secluded subdivision where you're having like, you don't get domestic violence calls to that community very often, right? So that felt different. The severity felt different, and obviously the media coverage felt different.
Clark says the first indication that the case would take the world by storm was Ruby and Jody's first appearance. It was supposed to be held virtually, but too many viewers from across the globe trying to watch caused the link to crash for everyone tuning in.
So we were getting ready to do the arraignments on these cases, and I got a call from the jail, who we work with a lot, right? So I get a call from the jail and they say, hey, we can't log on to the system. And so we called the court, and the court said, yeah, it's full. Like, it has like, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 people can be logged in to watch what the court streams. And our courthouse had never had it be full before. And that was when we kind of had an indication, there's a lot more interest in this than we'd ever anticipated there would be.
It wasn't until at least a month after their arrests that Clark realized what he was working with.
So those things all rolled in, most of it within the first month. The jailhouse calls obviously continued through sentencing. And then there was additional evidence that was gathered through interviews. And as we're trying to wrap our head around, I don't know if you, one of the things that we released are the Kevin Franke interviews, right? Like, as time went on and people kind of wrapped their head around what was going on, we were able to get better information from interviews, from people as to what had happened, who had been where, kind of a thing. So it really was about 2 months before we really felt like we wrapped our head around what was the relationship between Ruby and Jody, what was the motive behind all this abuse.
Let's talk about that, the relationship between Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt. And you've been very close to the case, and your team has been covering it for months and going deep into the investigation. How would you describe their relationship?
In my mind, I see Ruby as a religious acolyte, like a blind follower of Jody. And I don't think, initially we were like, what is this relationship? Is there more there than a business or a friendship? I don't think there was, right? I think that this is two people where Jody is saying, hey, I had a dream last night from God, and this is what we need to do today, or this is what we need to do we need to move, we need to discipline these kids, whatever it is. And Ruby was to a point in her life that she had separated herself from her husband, her extended family, her adult children. Like, she was just completely isolated. And so it was her minor children, and Jody were basically her contacts. And so that's kind of how I see that relationship having, and I fully believe that's how that relationship worked, is Ruby was just waiting for Jody to tell her what Jody was thinking or feeling on any given day, and then willing to go forward and do that.
With that in mind, what do you think was Jody's motivation then in instructing Ruby to do these terrible things?
That one is harder. Because we deal with cases where we've had people do awful things in the name of religion, right? and so you can kind of see like the followers. But when you have the ringleader who is just making stuff up to get people to like, I don't know if it's a power trip. I don't know if it's like narcissistic personality disorder. I don't know what it was that would lead Jody to think that. I mean, one of the things that Jody really wanted to do was to buy a ranch property in Arizona and move these kids out to the middle of nowhere so that they could discipline them further. Like, I just can't wrap my head around any motive or rational thought that would lead people to like, and from Jody's jailhouse calls, like, I really believe that she doesn't think she's done anything wrong. She was just trying to help the children, and for reasons that she doesn't understand, God is sending her to be a preacher in prison. So I think that's what's motivating her. Do I think that there's any basis in reality to any of that? Obviously not.
Clark and his team reached a plea deal with both Ruby and Jody, in which they pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse each. Let's talk about the plea deal. How did all of that happen? Were you prepared to go to trial? Did you decide a plea was better? How did all that work?
The advantages of plea deals is that you don't have to put victims through the drawn outness of a long case and the difficulty of a trial, and testifying and working through all of those things. So generally speaking, there are benefits to plea deals in victim work as long as you're still getting justice. In this case, Utah law puts a lid on the high end of how much time they could do in prison is 30 years, and so they could have pled to 100 counts of aggravated child abuse, and they still would have been a max of 30 years. So we needed to make sure that we had the ability to get to that threshold so that the parole board can hold these women for as long as they feel like is appropriate. So we got there, and the other part of the plea deal is, well, then there's the number of counts that you work on, but there's also what does the prison sentence look like? Under the Utah sentencing matrix, if you're a first-time offender of aggravated child abuse, there's a presumption that you're not doing jail or prison, that it's just a probation case, which is mind-blowing. I'm not defending that in any way, shape, or form, right? But that's where the matrix was at. Obviously, this is a horrific case, not a run-of-the-mill case. And so what we negotiated in the plea deal was they'd plead to 4 of the 6 counts, and they would agree to prison for each of those, and that the prison would run consecutive, so then we get to a 4-year minimum. In our mind, that was a justice was served.
At sentencing, we heard from both defendants.
Thank you to the Washington County Prosecutor's Office, Ryan Sham, the legal assistants and discovery clerks. Eric Clark, you exemplified to me how justice and mercy are meant to coexist. My charges are just. They offer safety to my family, accountability to the public, and they did show mercy to me, to my babies, my 6 little chicks. You were part of me. I was the mama duck who was consistently watering you to safety. I can see now, over the past 4 years, I was in a deep undercurrent that led us to danger. I never ventured to darkness knowingly. I was so disoriented that I believed dark was light and light was wrong. I would do anything in this world for you. My willingness to sacrifice all for you was masterfully manipulated into something very ugly. I took from you all that was soft and safe and good. I took from you your mother. How terrifying this must have been for you. I'll never stop crying. You're hurting your tender souls. You're so precious to me. I'm sorry.
During the sentencing, obviously you're there in the courtroom, so you hear from both Jodi and Ruby. What do you make of their statements?
Rui's surprised me, and I didn't expect that because we've been hearing her jailhouse calls, right? So the things that she said, I believe that to a significant degree that was all heartfelt, right? Like I think that she really does feel awful and realize that what she was doing was horrific. We've never had a sentencing like that where someone's gone through and thanked all of the different government actors. And so I was just in there feeling surprised, right? I was like, oh, this is different, and we're all trying to have poker faces because it's a big media story. And so we expected Ruby to be very remorseful, and I think that what we got was more than what we expected, and probably longer than what we expected.
I sincerely love these children. I desire for them to heal physically and emotionally. One of the reasons I did not go to trial is that I did not want them to emotionally relive the experience which would have been detrimental to them. My hope and prayer is that they will heal and move forward to have beautiful lives. I am willing to submit to what the state feels would be an appropriate amount of time served to make retribution as an outcome.
With Jodi, we could have had an office pool as to how many words we thought she was going to say, because she still wasn't admitting she'd done anything wrong, and we didn't think that she would. Like I don't know that she ever will. And so, what do you say in sentencing if you're not willing to really admit to stuff? So we were curious what Jodi was going to say, and then I think everybody, like we felt the same emotions everybody else felt when you don't admit guilt and you say you love the kids and wish them the best. Like it just kind of makes you want to vomit in your mouth, right?
Clark himself spoke at sentencing and made a stark comparison about the Franke children's abuse.
The state respectfully requests that the court sentence Ms. Franke to consecutive prison terms for each of the 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. This sentence was agreed to by Ms. Franke in her plea agreement and is also recommended by adult probation and parole. She committed horrible acts of child abuse. From May to August in 2023, Ms. Franke and her business partner held her 2 children, ages 9 and 11, turning 12, in a concentration camp-like setting. The children were regularly denied food, water, beds to sleep in, and virtually all forms of entertainment. They were isolated from others and were hidden when people came to visit the house where the children and the defendants were staying.
Now we've seen the photos that were so chilling and harrowing even to look at. And we've seen the videos of the young kids so emaciated and having open wounds. You've compared it to a concentration camp. Do you stand by that?
So I got a little bit of pushback from a super thoughtful person who reached out to us and said, hey, when you compare stuff to concentration camps, you like weaken what happened in the Holocaust. And that's not my impression or intention in it at all. Right? Like I was really struggling because we couldn't release stuff to the public yet. And I was needing to describe what had happened in the courtroom setting. And I had no frame of reference for that, people look like kids looking that bad and being forced to do, because even while they were that emaciated, and they were still being required to do physical tasks out in the sun for hours and hours and hours at a time. And the only frame of reference that I have in my mind is concentration camp stories from the Holocaust for that, right? So I don't, and it was religiously motivated, right? So I think that there are some parallels there. I don't want to be saying this was, the equivalent of that. Because they're very different things, but it's hard to find a frame of reference for this, the starvation, the physical demands, the religious nature. It's hard to find a frame of reference because this is just so outside of bounds of what normal society would do.
Both women were sentenced up to 30 years in prison, but it's still unclear exactly how long they'll serve for. I know it's up to the Utah Board of Parole and Probation to determine really how long. Ruby and Jody are going to spend behind bars. What do you expect as far as how long they really will be in prison?
I don't really have a guess for that. I hope, and I've said this in other settings, right? But I hope that they stay in prison until the community is safe, they're no longer a threat, and the victims in this case are both adult and in an emotional place to where they can figure out how to deal with their mom being out of prison. That's my hope. Whether that happens or not, I really wouldn't know where to guess. Anywhere between that 4 to 30. I don't know where the board's going to fall on this one, and I don't know how much of an impact. Like, we'll try to have an impact on that on Jody. Part of Ruby's plea deal is that we wouldn't try to have an impact on that. We wouldn't be submitting information or going up and arguing to the board. With Jody, we will be submitting information. We may be going up and arguing to the board if we want to see clear evidence that she's not going to come out and try to gather more followers and convince them to do, not like obviously the horrific abuse, but just the telling people to isolate, telling people to follow her without question. Like, we don't need that in our community.
In the end, Clark says he and his office are still working to cope with the case, finding new ways to see the bright side.
Everybody copes with cases in different ways. I cope by looking for silver linings. There are some cool things there's nothing cool about prior to today that the 12-year-old boy escaped, right? Nothing redeeming before that. But there are a lot of neat things that we get to see when we get to be like in the guts of it all.
But he has duct tape around
Big
his ankle.
injuries, there's sores around them.
Yeah, there's sores around him. I think there's a good chance he's been.
And he also has.
And he has it
around
around his
wrist
ankle.
as well.
I mean, his wrist as well. Okay, this boy has been.
Needs immediate attention. Oh, you were such a good kid.
This kid is obviously been. I think he's been.
I think that the ring footage of the couple that responded, they called 911, and they want to remain anonymous, and that is 100% their right? Like, they don't want to be involved in this, and I'm not trying to draw media attention to them. But watching how none of us are trained to deal with that, right? They just get a kid on their doorstep, and you watch how they try to put him at ease, try to get help there. They're not grilling him, they're not re-traumatizing him in any way, right? Like, they're just trying to get enough information that they can get the right kind of help. And then the law enforcement and the EMTs and how they come in and are able to help that boy. And then they go and they spend over 3 hours sitting in the closet with the girl, trying to help her feel comfortable, right? These are children who were completely brainwashed at that time, who believed that they deserved the abuse, that they belonged in jail, that police were going to be bad and take them away from their family, that hospitals were going to be bad and give them shots that were going to kill them. Like, they had been taught to distrust all institutions. And these caring police officers and EMTs are able to help those kiddos feel comfortable enough that they get them to voluntarily come out of that awful environment they were in. I mean, especially the girl in the closet, right? They just wait patiently.
I'm just gonna sit down. It's okay if I just sit here with you. We don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Okay? I'll just sit here with you.
They just continue to talk to her and work with her until she's there. And it still took her some time, right? Like, her initial interview with us, about the only thing she said is, if I talk to you, it's going to make my repentance process harder, which is heartbreaking, right? But the people that were able to show these kids care and to help meet their physical needs and start working on their emotional needs, it's really remarkable when the system can work that way to respond to something that's this dire. And nobody, like I said at the beginning, nobody that was involved was aware that this was going to be a high-profile case at that point. They were just trying to do their job and help these victims that they were looking at and that their hearts were breaking for. And I think that's an amazing part of the story. And it's a shout out to first responders, right? But it's also a powerful reminder of how much good there is in neighbors and in people that sit in the back of ambulances for a living. There's people that sit in police patrol cars for a living and do these hard work. A lot of times they're just such amazing people, and they get to really impact lives for good. And that's cool, right? Like, that's a silver lining to a really sad story.
I asked Clark how the Franke children are doing now, and he wouldn't give me specifics, but did say he's optimistic about their recovery. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.